there's only, say, one environmental organisation in the county, can that organisation propose a rep for each of the 4 PPNs? So there is an environmental rep on each of them. If now, it may be a hypothetical situation.
This actually is a bit of a problem with the difference between county level PPNs and areas, municipal areas, because there are a number of organisations, not just environmental organisations, but other organisations which are organised on a county level currently. And the way that we're looking at it in Tipperary is, the only thing I can tell you about is that in Tipperary, so long as somebody like Antashka, I can tell you about, if they have a association in Tipperary which covers the whole of Tipperary. They have one in Kilkenny, for instance. And what has been decided is, so long as there's a person from Antashka actually living in that municipal area, they would be able to represent the municipal area, the PPN. But when it comes to the county level, there'd only be one Antashka rep at the county level that's selected by Antashka itself.
Well, I'm just worried that the ordinary volunteer will get lost in all this.
I don't think there's any great danger of the ordinary volunteer getting lost, really. If you think about it as an organization issue, okay? Like the structure is not that complex. If you have 4 municipal districts in Kilkenny, is the social justice group in Kilkenny City, or is it in all municipal areas?
At the moment, the city.
Okay, just stay with that one, right? Okay, it means in effect then that they can be part of the municipal district for Kilkenny City and part of the county. Okay, and there will be a number of meetings a year of both of them, and somebody from the organisation can go along. There's no compulsion that they have to go along, but obviously if they want to know what's going on, they can do that. However, of greater interest might be when one of the linkage groups might be addressing something that's of serious concern to the justice group, and that there's a representative or 2 to be chosen from a linkage group on a particular issue that is of serious concern to the linkage group or to the social justice organization, then they can join that linkage group. Somebody can go along to that linkage group. And that means that the organization then is in touch with that issue on an ongoing basis. And not alone that, but that they can actually influence it, because they discuss at their own meeting what the position will be of their representatives when the meetings come. They will then get a report back on that, and they can meet again. They can join the next meeting and review it and decide what they want to do moving on from there towards the next meeting and so on. It only involves like one person going along to the actual meeting. The wider organization's membership can continue to do exactly what they're doing at the moment, engaged as they are in whatever they're engaged with. This simply adds an additional element, but the element does give you the capacity to have your voice heard in that particular arena that you want to influence much more directly than would otherwise have been the case. It also ensures that your organization remains fully informed about the issues, whatever they happen to be, that are of concern or interest to you at any particular time, and that you will be fully, like by simply being at the linkage group or even following the reports. If you mightn't be able to get to all the linkage groups, but you can read the reports and so on. You are much more engaged than you might otherwise have been, much more aware of what's actually happening, and then therefore more aware maybe of what you should be trying to influence and what recommendations you should be making or actions you should be taking. Just in some counties, there have been nominations for people from the community, voluntary, environmental sectors in advance of the PPNs being up and running. Now, all of those appointments are interim appointments until the PPNs are up and running. And the understanding, I think, at the government level and at the department level is that all PPNs would be in a position to have nominated all people to all various operations by the end of the year. So there may be in some counties a transition issue for a short while, in which there may be people chosen from other mechanisms.
I can tell you, again in Tipperary, there has been, there is definitely a wish that the PPNs be set up properly and that they don't be done in a rush. One of the problems, one of the things that we have to get in with a PPN is make sure that it is inclusive, make sure that we bring everybody, all the groups onto the PPN and all that before we start electing people, linkage groups and all of that.
Sorry, I'm just curious as to why there has to be so many layers though, because currently people can contact the council or they can contact the partnerships directly without having to go through.
You can still do that. You can still do that.
So what's the purpose of this? Just the current partnership model that's in place has that structure. It has community and voluntary reps on it. It has statutory reps. I mean, it just seems that this is something that's been simulated with a lot of more layers.
I don't see where you're finding the layers, but let me just deal with the issue of what's happening and it's happened in some places. I know of local authorities in Ireland where there are 600, 700, 800 organizations in the county or city that I'm thinking of, right? And there are less than 10 that were involved in having seats on any county committee, strategic policy committee, or any other organ of the county. Now there's something fundamentally wrong with that. What we're trying to do here is to try to ensure the engagement of as many organizations as possible on an ongoing basis right throughout the 5-year term of the local authority. All these various structures have 5-year lifespans. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that there's a real engagement there. Like we did this, we've done this roadshow in a whole lot of different places. But in one place, there was a lady gave us a hard time because she said we were adding to her workload because she was giving over 40 hours. She was a person with a job, but she was giving over 40 hours, additional hours a week as a volunteer working on different county committees that she had been nominated to in previous time. Now, my answer to her is, what's she doing 40 hours of work a week on different committees? Surely there's other people in the county who would be more than happy to share that. And there's other organisations that she's not linked to at all.
I think maybe we should realise, first of all, that the present development, I would say, of PPNs is a development from what happened in 1999, from better local government, when at that stage there were kind of two pillars of community and voluntary as separate pillars as the ones that were used in the beginning as the way to get involvement of the local voice at in local structure and local government. Now, one of the things I think which I was liked by what you said was the importance of shared vision. Now, but the question I would have is, when you elect or get representatives from different groups, and I think it's very important that all groups and ideas are represented, may you be leading to divisiveness, that a group may saying this is ours and someone else isn't leading, where an awful lot of community groups have people involved from all sectors, and their idea, and they're involved themselves in all three sectors, but under the structure they have to declare for one or other. And that may cause certain problems for some groups. The second thing is that as regards the secretariat, in the document it says there must be a minimum of 2 from each of the sectors. I know, Sean, you said it was 2, 2, 2, but the document says a minimum of 2. Now, in what sense, you know, if a group, or we say the county in this case, wish to have more than 2, is there a process for that? And secondly, in the structure that's outlined, there doesn't seem to be anything within the structure as to how you might establish a structure at municipal area, other than that one person from each municipal area is elected to the secretariat. Thirdly, where you have environmental, community voluntary and social inclusion, they're the groups from which the secretariat is elected. Now, these groups in themselves, you know, they may come together for that. Now, is it part of the idea behind the new structure that these three separate groups should function within the county or within municipal areas? And if so, what process should be there to ensure that they're there? And secondly, what way would they be funded to function? And thirdly, there doesn't seem to be any defined structure as to how the Secretariat operates, other than there's 10 people elected, and there's a person to service it. Now, one of the dangers in any organization is that a chief executive, which in this case would be the person functioning running the Secretariat, could themselves, if there's not a good structure underneath them with chairperson, secretaries and so on, begin to be the person who runs it, and the groups themselves get answerable to that person rather than they themselves running the thing as the idea is.
Did you get all that?
Oh. Yeah, there's a lot of questions. I have about 6 questions here that I've written down. If I go to the end first, the Secretariat and how it operates, we're very strongly of the view that the Secretariat at a county level is a communications mechanism without power, in the sense of it doesn't make decisions. And that's critically important in this structure. The reason being that we do not want a chair or a chief executive or somebody or a small cohort of people who actually make the decisions, because that has been a very kind of tricky business for a long time, that the vast majority of others are excluded from the decision-making process in practice, or they just depart, like they kind of melt away over a period of time. So what we're trying to do is to maintain or to develop a structure and maintain a structure that maximizes engagement on an ongoing basis. So the Secretariat is basically a communications mechanism, and it can structure itself. I don't see it like necessarily having a chair and a secretary and all that sort of stuff. I think somebody who convenes it, there's different ways of facilitating these. The pillars at a national level, both the community and voluntary pillar and the environmental pillar, operate on this kind of model. They don't actually have a chair and a secretary to the pillar and all that sort of stuff. They have a convener or a coordinator or somebody who does a job for a relatively small period of time and hands it on to somebody else who hands it on to somebody else, and it's automatic. Nobody can kind of gain control of it and everybody stays engaged. But the critical issue in all of that is that the communication has to be real. And what we would be suggesting, we take it as a given in this context, that there's a website, that there's e-lists, that there's a kind of an automatic development of communication that keeps everybody who wishes to be informed. And if there's somebody in the county who wants to know, to be kept informed about everything that's happening in every working group or in every strategic policy committee and LCDC and all the rest of it, fine. Let them, they have every entitlement as a member of the PPN to actually have all that information. I think most people would probably limit themselves to things they're actually interested in or that they're engaged with, that their organization is kind of majoring on, if you like. But the mechanism has to facilitate that. Now, the structure of the municipal area hasn't been kind of set down. It's very much to be kind of worked out at that area, because in the municipal areas are, while they have roughly the same kind of number of people and so on, they may have hugely different levels of organizations, and therefore they can do what's appropriate to themselves. However, again, we wouldn't be recommending that you'd have chairs and secretaries and treasurers and all this kind of stuff. I think we'd be more focused on trying to organize a mechanism that somebody takes responsibility for convening meetings and rotating chair, or whatever the story happens to be, or maybe a number of different people might rotate a chair because they're good at chairing. That I'm pretty sure in any Irish situation, there's more than one person can be a good chair, but there's lots of people who might not be good chairs, so you don't want them there, but you could have a number of rotating chairs or something of that nature. But basically, it can be structured in a way that organizes the meetings that the organizations want organized. Like the municipal the organizations at a municipal level, they decide how many times a year they want to meet, how they want those meetings structured, what they want to do. Do they want to engage with the local councillors in their municipal area, or with the county council on the particular area? Whatever the issue, whatever they want to actually do. A minimum of 2 per strand on the Secretariat. I think basically, if that's what's in it, what's actually recommended, or what's actually there is 2 per strand. There can't be a situation where one pillar decides that it's not going to nominate 2 people, so nobody else can nominate 2 people. We couldn't. That's not going to be acceptable. But the interesting thing in this is, remember that the guidelines are there at the moment to work out the wrinkles. These will become regulations within a relatively short time when they're kind of ironed out. And within that process, once they're ironed out, they become regulations. They become the law of the land. So the law has to be implemented. So in that context, there'll be a certain amount of this within that structure. The issue of opting for one of rather than the 3 strands, I think, is an important issue. There are organizations that have an interest, like my own organization, would have a strong interest in social inclusion. We'd have a strong interest in environment. We'd have a strong interest in volunteering and a whole lot of stuff that isn't actually social inclusion. But we'd be clear enough that we're principally a justice organization and focused on social inclusion. So in the context of, we're not in this space because we're not organized at a county level, and we don't choose to be. We choose not to be. But we would be nominating, if we were in that space, we would be nominating ourselves into one of those strands, the one that we major on, if you like, the one that's the biggest thing for us. And after that, remember that because the linkage groups are open to the stakeholders, if something came up that we were actually a stakeholder on, even though it wasn't social inclusion, we have every right to be in the stakeholders group. And then we'd have a voice in choosing the best person to represent that group of stakeholders on that particular issue. I may have missed a few things there.
I'm imagining that it's going to take some time for these PPNs to evolve, because groups that are not here will hear about it in 3 months' time and so on. And I'm just wondering, from the County Council's point of view, will there be some flexibility around registering for the PPNs, that we're not going to have a cut-off point that's going to exclude people for a whole calendar year, for example? I think that would be very important to ensure that we start out with the most representative PPN possible, acknowledging that it will grow in future. And secondly, apologies if I missed this at the outset, but I'm just wondering what the state of play is with regarding to the strategic policy committees now that the council has been elected. Where are we at with that? And are they going to be held off until the PPNs are fully up and running? And finally, maybe somebody from the council could update us on exactly how many groups have registered. Like, how is it going? Is there a big build-up? Is there a bit of momentum? And just to say that it is a very difficult time of year to be trying to recruit people to come to meetings and to join things. So be patient with us. I think the process is fantastic, and it's going to give us an opportunity, whatever hats we wear, and many of us wear more than one, to liaise with each other and constructively work with the council and developing its plans. And it's not just about the leader funding. I mean, there was a question earlier about leader, and it's way more than that. We will have an opportunity to work constructively on a local community and economic plan, which will influence the council's activities for up to 6 years. And I think that's a very influential position to be in. It doesn't exclude the role of councillors. It's a kind of parallel process that I think is going to be healthy for local democracy.
Just to correct you, I suppose, you're the interim environmental rep on the interim LCDC side. Interim. As I explained earlier, we set up, and we're hastening slowly. Why we set up the LCDC fairly quick in May. We've always said it's the interim LCDC, interim non-statutory, pending the statutory regulations coming in. They came in last Friday week. We've now in the process of establishing, over the next number of months, on an ongoing basis, or on a drip feed nearly basis, because as of now, all we have are 3 political nominees to make up members. The PPN structure, or the facilitated process that Lindsay and Breed and Lisa have been running, when that process is finished towards the end of the year, when we're confident that it's truly representative of the community, voluntary, social inclusion and environmental sectors, then we'll be looking for the nominees back through those processes to take the seats on the statutory. Likewise with the public organisations that we're dealing with, Teagasc, DSP, the Education and Training Boards, well, they've nominated people onto the interim committee, and we'll be re-engaging with them as we develop over the next number of months to ensure that the organisations that are required to be on the LCDC and their nominees may change as well. The flexibility around registering, we will be, in that process, we'll be very flexible. And as I mentioned earlier, we invited Nikki Brennan to come on board to be an interim chair until we're ready to vote, or until the committee is fully in place and is ready to vote in a chairman and vice chairman from the members of the committee. We didn't go with voting a committee or a chairman at the very first interim meeting, because that could more than likely would have been an elected member, and that elected member may or may not have held their seat, and we would have to go through the process again and possibly go through it at every meeting as the membership develops. The SPC's position, we didn't get to that item at today's agenda, formal to put an SPC discussion document out for public consultation. That will not now happen until September. So I would think that the SPCs won't be in place until October, possibly November at the very earliest. So it's timely, perhaps, that the PPN structure will be developing, and hopefully will have developed to the point that it will be fully representative, fully participatory, and be able to nominate people onto the SPCs. Who has registered so far? Lindsay and Breed might be best able to say it.
I suppose to date we have from over 1,000 actual invites that would have gone out to groups around the county. We have 34 registered groups to date.
There are about 1,000. We reckon there are about 1,000 groups in Tipperary as well. We currently have about 200 registered, and we won't be happy till at least 500 are registered. We don't believe that the PPNs can call themselves PPNs until such time as we have about 500, at least half the groups registered.
Linkage groups and different points of view. I was trying to convey that earlier on, that if a person is chosen to represent a linkage group in any arena, you know, whether that's an SPC or whether it's a county committee or whatever the structure happens to be, they have a responsibility to carry forward the views of the group. And if the views of the group are deeply divided, then they have to carry forward the division. And that, so go back to your example of the canoeists and whatever, like at the anglers, yeah. Like they then have to take both of those, and they have to present both, saying basically the groups who have a stakeholding in this are very divided on this issue. Now, at one level, that's a challenge to the groups involved, to see if they can work out some kind of modus operandi that they could agree on, and if they could, that might be of huge assistance to the county committee or whatever they're on, because they might be struggling to find a similar kind of thing. So I think that would be okay. The issue about supports for socially excluded, we have that written into our report, not just for socially excluded, but that's critical. Because if people are, like if English isn't their first language, or if they are very poor, or, you know, they have, sorry?
It's all very well being written into a report, but how are you going to ensure that?
Okay, I was coming to that. We wrote it in the report, right? Because we consider it. We also think there's need for supports for upskilling people, because not everybody has been in these kinds, in fact, most people have not been in these kinds of arenas, so they need some kind of supports and upskilling to maybe help them in that context. So what we have said is those resources need to be made available. That is agreed in the context of the guidelines. It will also be in the regulations. Now, one of the issues that is a problem in the second half of this year is that they were never written into anybody's budget, because they weren't there when the budgets were being done last October or November, whatever, okay? So there's a 6-month transition period that we're just going to have to get to the end of. But I would see it as being an issue that needs to be worked out quite clearly here. There's an additional mechanism into which this plays, and it is this. As I understand the structure going forward, it won't, not just in terms of the PPNs, but of the whole county, the new county structure, with the county manager now being the CEO, that the county manager will have a service level agreement with government that's going to be worked out, I think, with maybe through the auspices of Pobble. I'm not too sure of the detail because I'm not that involved in that side of it at all. But there will have to be there is going to be a mechanism in which there's an agreement between the government and the county, okay? In that agreement, PPNs are part of that, okay? And the implementation of that will be monitored in the same way that any government expenditure is monitored. And so there will have to be expenditure allocated and then accounted for, either it's used or it's not used. Finally, there will be a national monitoring of PPNs put into place. And in that national monitoring, it'll be looking at two things. One is the issue about, will they take any note, like, are the PPNs being ignored at the county level, okay? And the second question will be, are the PPNs operating the way they're supposed to operate according to the regulations? Because, like, no structure is perfect, and obviously PPNs could get taken over if they were if people allow it to happen, and a few organizations run everything or whatever. The whole idea is to involve large numbers of organizations in that situation.
The other advantage is, if you do that, if a PPN does that, it means to say that the elected reps and the council have one group to come and talk to. They don't, if you've arranged yourselves in the PPN, it's open. I think there's a huge possibility for all of that sort of stuff in the future.
Okay, that's good.
Vincent Dempsey, I'm with the Kells Development Association. Just 2 points I'm wondering clarification on. One, it just seems to me somewhat counterintuitive in a sense that looking at social inclusion, voluntary and environment, that they would sort of fall in any sense naturally into sort of three proportional representations of the community. In other words, it seems to me that the community and voluntary section would comprise a much larger series of organisations. Now, that may not be the case, but I'm just wondering how that proportionality came about. And the second question is just a clarification in relation to the LCDC in terms of non-statutory representation. You talked about 5 representatives from the community, at least from this the PPN, but I'm just wondering who make up the other 3 representatives of the non-statutory. Thank you.
First of all, the proportional representation, the issue of numbers of organizations. The reason that we came the way we came, there are a number of different things going in there. First of all, there's a lot of work required on a social inclusion front, okay? There are a large number of organizations, you're probably right in a lot of cases, in that the sort of voluntary organizations are likely to have larger numbers of organizations. But the third piece is the environmental organizations, and you might cast your mind back to the early part of the evening, and it fits in maybe more clearly now. The point that Charles was making was that the environmental pillar had statutory rights to be involved on their own basis, without any reference to anybody, in a whole range of these structures. And they have decided to be part of the PPN. Now, in our original proposal from the working group, there were to be sort of 2 reps, so there would be 6 from the PPN on the LCDC. The government in its wisdom cut that to 5, or wisdom in inverted commas. But I would be strongly of the view that you keep it 2, 2, and 1. Like, sorry, I'd prefer if 1 or 2, but given the way it is, I think there's a real danger that if we go with the proportionality issue, that you could wind up, for example, with like 2 or 3 times as many voluntary organizations as there are social inclusion organizations, and then 2 or 3 times social inclusion that there are environment. The problem with that is you're being driven by a force in numbers to ignore sort of critical issues, whether they be environmental or social inclusion. And many of the issues that are being discussed and argued about at policy level are in those 2 spaces. So I think it's very important that they all be there. However, again, I draw attention to the fact that there's a lot of different arenas in which issues get played out, particularly on county committees or on SPCs or whatever. And I think in that context, people can be part of a linkage group and be very engaged in the linkage group. And the linkage group doesn't have to be confined to any particular group, any particular one of the pillars, or any particular one of the strands or colleges, whatever you want to call it. But for me, the critical issue in that context is that the linkage group chooses the appropriate people to go and represent them, so that they pick people to go and represent them who can do that well and do that fairly and do that effectively, you know. And I think over a period of time, the group will learn who has the capacity and maybe make good choices in that context, it seems to me. Certainly, if I was in a linkage group, I would want to be represented by the two most capable people.
Thanks very much for as Sean said, the engagement that we got tonight. It's brilliant, actually, just to hear the amount of questions and criticisms and whatever coming from the floor. I'd like to thank Lisa, Breed and Lindsay for all the work that they've done over the last number of months and will be doing over the next number of months in order to ensure that we get proper engagement, proper representation and a properly participative structure with communication lines completely open. I'd like to thank Microfilms and Alan Snattery for filming and making the seminar available to a wider audience. Just to mention that there's information packs available if you haven't got them already, and it's just to go back to your groups and your communities and the people that you're working with to ensure that they engage with these processes and register to become involved. And again, just to thank Sean and Charles for their very enlightened presentations and the way that they have engaged with you yourselves tonight, taking on board your comments and answering them. In particular to Charles, because it's being from Tip, it's great to hear you come in and give Tipperary as best practice. Okay? Just to show your appreciation again to both Sean and Charles tonight. Thank you.